Right, what's up, Dragon Brood? We're about 2 weeks in now on Bloomburrow being out, and every once in a while I do a run of hot takes. I hit up social media and I see what y'all have to say about it. Well, this time I wanted to see with the different expectations for Bloomburrow how everybody feels about it. So let's hop in and see what y'all's hot takes are for Bloomburrow. All right, for this first one says they did the Birdfolk really dirty. Several of the payoff cards you want to be playing non-flying creatures, but all the bird creatures are fly. Yeah, that's totally true. I think Hub Hikari hits it perfectly here. Like, for whatever reason, the birds just don't work well in this set. Now, generally, when something like that happens, I feel like they're normally setting us up for something to come down the road. So there may be something that cares about non flying things with flyers in the next couple of sets. Who the heck knows? But yeah, right now, birds are definitely not where you want to be. And it's a bit disappointing if you like playing that creature type from previous sets. This one comes from another creator, LevDev, who says the talent cycle was probably the most slept on cycle of the set until we played with them. This is maybe partially true. I think the average player probably underestimated the value and how good those would be. But I think the people that did a lot of brewing or whatever mentioned these a few times. I'm pretty sure the videos I did with Dev, not Lev Dev, but Dev from SBMTG, we actually talked about a couple of those. I think there was one or two we may have overlooked, generally speaking, even between that and, doing stuff with my boys over on Magic Mike's. But yeah, by the way, Magic Mike's, you should check that out. And Color of Magic, my other podcast. But in general, I think we knew these were going to be playable. Now, I don't think we realized how good they were going to be. I think that's a reasonable discussion to have because I think, we knew, especially like Innkeeper's talent or whatever, we knew those were going to do stuff. It's just like, how good overall would they be? As it turns out, several of them are pretty good. And I think there's even room for the ones that you're seeing underplayed right now. So, yeah, I don't know if this is so much a true hot take, but it's a pretty reasonable take, to be honest. This next one comes from Test the Raccoon and says, not enough raccoons. Well, this might be a little biased since the username is Test the Raccoon. It'd be like if my name was something chocolate and I said, this food needs more chocolate. That being said, I think one of the downsides to the set could be said that because of the size of the set, and we had effectively 10 different creature types that we featured, not to mention stuff like weasels and stoats or whatever, we had other things in there, foxes, right? We didn't really get to do a lot of any one of them. And I think in some cases, like you had stuff like similar to expand, right? On the raccoons, that there's only, I don't even know if there's a handful of cards that we care about actually that have the keyword expend. And I think the same thing can be said about the other creatures, where there's mechanically just sometimes one or two things that care about that thing because we didn't get to put that many of them in the set. Now, that being said, they at least did a good job of making things like the raccoons work well together. So you can play, I mean, we have one on the channel if you want to check it out, a really good raccoon deck that performed admirably. So I don't think the quantity of them has affected the quality. But I do agree with Tess here to the fact that I think we would have wanted more of each creature type overall. All right, this one's from Goose the Archivist. Says it's a fire set, but it has almost no actual value pieces, most of which are reserved for the commander decks. I'm not sure how to approach this because if we're saying value as far as playability, I think that's totally wrong. There's tons of cards in the set that are useful, and I think if you've been playing on the ladder, you've seen tons of Bloomburrow cards popping up everywhere, so I don't think that's it. If we're talking about dollar value, I think this is kind of what can happen when you have a set that, especially for standard, if this had been something that, older formats wanted more of, I think this wouldn't be the case, but with it being standard, when a standard set is that popular and is opened a ton, well, then the prices are going to tend to be lower because there's more of it out there. There'll be a few cards in the set that will just appear in a lot of decks, so then people will want those cards. So there's always going to be a handful of cards that are in that like $15 to $25 range. But they're going to get a lot of rares and mythics that are going to be $1 to $5, right? That's just kind of the way it's going to be. And we talked about this on my podcast this week where it's not necessarily a bad thing when you have a lot of people opening this up, especially a set like Bloomburrow, where a lot of people are going to use this as their on ramp, right? They're going to see these cool cards and they're going to want to build these theme decks. Having these cards actually be lower value. I don't even really want to say cheap, but having them be lower cost means that these players can now just build the decks they want to build, even especially if they want to play standard for under $100, and in a lot of cases under $50. So that's awesome, right? Like if we want to revitalize standard, this is kind of the type of set you wanted to have around. It's a set where the cards will be lower price, and it's a set that people are going to want to buy for a while. Now, I do think the other side of this is with this set being standard legal for 3 years, we will get somewhere down the road where we're talking 18 months, 24 months, where this set's just simply not going to be printed anymore. And probably even a year from now, not as many people will be opening this for packs. People will just be buying singles to build their decks. And that's going to slowly drive up some of these prices as well. So if a card is really playable and can show up in a couple of decks, but it's not necessarily in a bunch of top tier decks, those could be the cards to grab now while they are less desirable or at least more readily available. But yeah, overall, I do think the individual cards are lower cost. But again, I don't think this is a hot take as much as it is just kind of an observation overall. But I do at least somewhat agree with it. April King, or otherwise known as Cube April, good follow over on Twitter, says, I started out not liking the limited format, but the more I do, the deeper it becomes. It's not an all-time great format, but I'm definitely enjoying it. Most color pairs are playable, which is a pretty big accomplishment. You know, like some people are going to read this as a hot take, which is kind of amusing because I think more than anything, if you went through the threads I posted, people had the biggest, like, of any opinions, this was the one that was like the most questionable, right? Some people said this is the worst format for limited and whatever, and sealed is garbage and draft is the worst. And then the other side were people saying how brilliant it is and how much they enjoy it and how much they learn from it. I don't play limited very much. I play some sealed if I go to a pre-release, and if I have some friends that want to draft occasionally, I'll draft. So I don't spend a lot of time in those pools. But one of the things I do know, even from when I used to draft a lot, was that people tend to like a draft format more when they're winning and tend to dislike it more when they're losing. So, right or wrong, I think I tend to view people saying like, "Oh, I hate this format, it's the worst ever," is like I read that as I haven't had much success in this format. Whereas the people who tend to love it and are killing it and crushing it and getting all the prizes think it's one of the best formats ever. So I don't know how accurate that is, but that's sort of what it feels like when I see those comments. Generally speaking, though, I have seen significantly more people say that they enjoyed this limited format than they have even some of the past two or three, which is actually pretty cool. Again, you're not taking any crazy cards away from it, but people are just having fun playing it. And that's kind of what you want at the end of the day. Now, the people that don't like it, I don't know. Even overall, there's still some people who just don't like the flavor of Bloomburrow, even though it's probably going to go down as one of the all-time selling sets. All right, so Lexi, Neighborhood Angel, says, very tired of Izzard decks, very tired of Otters, very tired of Boros Mice. Would appreciate to see more Frog decks, to be honest. I mean, this is definitely a hot take, because I have to admit, I haven't seen hardly any Izzard decks. I've run into Otters like maybe 3 times. I do run into Boros Mice a little bit, but it's usually some other form of Boros control or mono red aggro or something. It's not even mice all that much. And I've seen a modest amount of frog decks, but the frog decks have done pretty well, to be honest. I had one that did great. I saw some other creators with them. I saw on social media, Kibler was talking about a version he's working on that does pretty well. So there's a good chance you'll see more frogs down the road. If anything, I would say the frogs of the ones where the creature types we've mentioned are probably the least obvious. So you get fewer people building with them early till they see other people do it or figure out what cards are the ones they should prioritize or whatever. And that's fair. You know, people are just trying to manage their money and resources and don't want to waste time or resources on cards they don't know how they're going to work. And the mice were a little more easy to figure out. I think otters feel easy to figure out, but they're actually not as easy, I think, as people think. But generally, I think this is one of those things that you're probably just tired of seeing whatever creature type you run into a bunch. Sometimes it's just random luck of the draw. Like, I was just saying the other day, I've had a couple of days where I've played against 10 decks in a row that have black in them and seen no red, right? That's just not a thing that used to happen. So it just comes and goes. Not that big a deal. John Drake says, super aggro set with a lot of fun cards, but still struggles against control. Did pull a Cruel Claw, though, so I'm excited to try and build with him as a commander. I don't think this set or the creature types in the set struggle any more than any other aggro deck would. I think you just like, oh man, I feel like I could do a whole video on this of like how aggro decks lose to control all the time. Like I watch it and people just make mistakes and they just walk into the removal or they don't play enough cards that survive sweepers and stuff. It's just a whole thing. But I think these are fine. I don't think that these are any more susceptible to control than previous. If anything, I would say control kind of ends up on the bubble a little bit more because you can't stumble as much in the early game. You know, there's a couple of really good, really strong, super aggressive options that if you don't have that early removal or two, or you have that extra land come into play tapped, you could be paying for it. So, yeah, I think things are still balanced. I don't see an unreal amount of control or an unreal amount of aggro. If anything, there's probably an odd amount of mid-range stuff with like Golgari, discard, like a lot of that running around. So yeah, I don't know if I necessarily agree with this one. Like, struggle against control is questionable. If you're a player that already plays a lot of aggro and already struggles against control, it's probably more of the same. So yeah, I don't know what to think about this one. All right, so this comes from a user that goes by Farewell Toe Art 1. Says, as fun as this set, I think is what they meant to say, seemed to have been online, it's probably the fastest I've seen a set die. I completely disagree. Sales also disagree. Yeah, I don't. If people were chasing money and don't want or maybe disappointed that there's not super high dollar cards in here, sure, but yeah, singles are still moving. People are still wanting to build decks. I'm seeing a few more people playing standard that weren't playing before. So yeah, this one it's a hot take, but I definitely disagree with this one. Like, there's more people interested in Bloomburrow. There's more people asking questions about Bloomburrow cards. There's more people trying to build theme decks out of the set. So yeah, I don't think it's anywhere near dying, honestly. All right, so Team Primetime says Weasels need actual kindred support or a mechanic on them instead of just getting the type. A scorching hot take is that they made the red base cards way too powerful to the point where it will warp standard. Oh, that's definitely a hot take. I disagree, though, with both of these points. I think if Weasels weren't going to be a main theme in the set, because I think we only got two of them, they don't really need mechanics fleshed out for them. Matter of fact, you would probably end up just wasting a mechanic that you'd have to find a way to squeeze in later or bring back later. So it's kind of cool that they at least introduced them. So somewhere down the road, and I don't know, a year from now or whatever, we can have a few more in a set, and maybe even a set after that. And then you've got 6, 8, 10 Weasels that you can play in a standard deck if you want to for the last year, that all those are playable by each other, in the 3-year rotation. So I think that's actually fine if they go that route. Maybe they also just wanted to sample it and see how people feel about Weasels being a creature type. I don't know. I think the Stoat is pretty cool. That's aside, Red got so many cards that it's going to warp standard. So far, that has not been the case. Now, did Red get some good cards? Sure, but Red also lost some good cards in like Commando Faces Kakazan, Play with Fire, things like that were kind of staples in the Red decks. Had to get replaced with cards that were different, in some cases lesser than what they had before. Now, some of the new stuff is still very good, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's enough of a shift from where they were. Like, if anything, a half point plus or minus, if we were giving them like a 10-point rating, it's not significantly different. So I don't see this warping standard at all. And so far, that really hasn't been the case. The lovely Medusa says, this set contains multiple cards that will be a $15 to $30 commander ranges in 3 years. Okay. Or bangers in 3 years. Misread that. Yeah, okay. So this is always an interesting thing because I think more cards become valuable for commander the longer they're not standard legal. And we've seen this before. I think if you want to rewind to a set like the second Ixalan set from last time, not Ixalan, but whatever the one that followed that was, there were a lot of cards in there that while they were standard legal, nobody cared about. A bunch of them were 50 cents, 75 cents, $1 if you were lucky, but you could get a bunch of them very cheaply. But once that rotated out of standard, once we got to like 2 years out and 3 years out, you start looking back and going, wait, this set has this card that's worth a bunch, and this uncommon is worth this much. And, they start going up in value because we are also reaching a point where while there are reprints, they can't just reprint everywhere all the time, right? They don't have a place for them. Sometimes they're in secret layers, sometimes they show up in commander decks, but you just can't get everything reprinted. So there's always going to be something that falls into that category that becomes, I don't know if I'd say 15 to 30, but definitely like a $10 to $20 card for sure. I guess technically $20 falls in that 15 to 30 range, but you know what I'm saying. Like, I think there's a lot of value to be had in several cards that we just ignore because, like, oh, well, those weren't tournament viable or those weren't any good in standard or whatever. And then they just go into some bulk box and you never see them again. And I know from when I bought collections and people tell me, like, oh, well, this box is just bulk. The number of times I've gone through it and found basically $20 bills just all through it is because people just don't go back and revisit those cards. And I think that's becoming a pretty regular thing. Another thing to note is while we're printing all these universes beyond stuff, at some point we're going to have to do like a reprint, I don't know, what are we going to call it? Universes within masters or something? Because there's going to be even more of those that we just can't reprint somewhere. So yeah, I don't know, while we're getting the ability to reprint more cards that have come out, so they're worth a little less as a peak, they're still going to have to find somewhere in the rotation to reprint them. And I think that's a whole different discussion. But yeah, for the most part, I think I agree with this hot take, and I don't think that is totally wrong, especially since you have stuff like Innkeeper's Talent that's already getting up to the $20 range. All right, the Average Dad Gamer says, Hugs is the best card in the set with a sunglasses, smiley emoji, and a raccoon. Close as you can have, because I think Hugs is actually a badger, not a raccoon. But I don't think it's the best card in the set. I don't think I like Hugs. Don't get me wrong. I've already had Hugs in 2 different decks, I think, on this channel, and I will be playing Hugs more. I think it's a very, very good card. I mean, it's a 5/5 for 4, if nothing else, and it has all upside, right? Even in decks where you just want to play multiple lands and you don't even care about paying X, he probably has a use there in Commander somewhere. So, damn good Magic card, but yeah, I don't think I can say it's the best in the set. Matter of fact, I'm not even sure I would say Hugs is the top 5 in the set. I think I'd have to really go back and look at that and evaluate it, but still a very good card, but definitely a hot take. All right, Chief is Dead says, I doubt this is a hot take, but it's the most well-designed Magic set in 2024 and one of the best sets in years. Oh man, I always have a tough time with these discussions where we talk about what makes for good design or bad design. Like on one hand, you could get very technical, right? And say like how do the colors interact? Do the color pairs make sense? And yada yada yada, right? On the other side, you have playability and do the fans like it or whatever. And then there's even another metric of just like how do people view it based on their favorites not being good or bad or whatever the case may be. And like I don't know, right? Because part of me says like I do like the feel of the set. I like the fact that I won't even say it's a different direction because we've had mice in the game before. We've had not raccoons, we've had squirrels, though we have had raccoons in the game prior to this set. So like it's not like these are new creature types for the most part, but there is something to be said about, squirrels not really being a squirrel deck that's good. That birds are not really able to make a bird deck that's good. So could we argue that that's a flaw in design? Maybe. I mean, are these also like plants for stuff coming later? Possibly, right? So it's hard for me to say, but do I enjoy it? Yeah. Do I think it brings in a lot of people? Yeah. So I think from the business side, I think it checks a lot of boxes. From a fundamental, like, is this the best designed? I always feel like that's always arguable. I don't even know how to measure that. So while this is probably a hot take, I mean, it's a reasonable opinion for somebody to have. So yeah, nothing wrong with it. All right, Rayadon MTG says, not sure if it's hot. So there you go. But it's an observation. A huge part of the success is that there was not a rare land cycle for folks had to burn 20 plus wild cards on day one. Instead, they could get the fun rares they wanted and build more decks faster and more efficiently. This might be considered a hot take by folks. I mean, I think there's always been an understanding that if you were going to have multi-lands that were functionally superior to a lot of other things, they tended to fall into the rare slot. And some people think it's good, some people think it's bad. It's kind of been a design thing for years. Again, coming back to the previous hot take of like what makes for good or bad design, I think there's a whole different discussion about that. But in this case, I do think there is something to be said for that, right? Because people aren't having to burn wild cards or spend money on getting rares. they can get more of the cards that they want. And this kind of leaves fewer chase cards, I would say, because a lot of the lands will fall in the $5 or $10 range a bunch of times, and those are eating up some slots that would otherwise go to other things. In this case, maybe it was the right thing to do because you had 10 different creature types you're trying to feature in the set, so you needed more slots to go to those, really, and it kind of makes sense in that regard. Now, do I think we should never have rare lands? I don't know if that's particularly true, but I think if it's like 5 that are man lands or creature lands, something like that, I don't really have an issue with it. I think that's totally fine. I think when it's just a set of shock lands or whatever that are kind of ubiquitous that people feel they need to play with to be competitive on any level, then I think it becomes a little bit of an issue. But yeah, overall, I think it did benefit this set to not actually have rare lands when you're trying to fill out all these different creature types. So yeah, this might be a little bit of a hot take. I don't know, but I kind of agree with it. All right, Phoenix Rising says Patchwork Banner is a scam because I always draw 2 land and a banner on opening hand and it's miserable. Also, the only good Bloomburrow land is the swamp one. The rest are okay at best. Yeah, this isn't a hot take. This is just wrong. Like, Patchwork Banner, I've had it in hand plenty of times and definitely had more and less land. I've not had an issue with that. The only land being a good one is the swamp one. I disagree with that as well. Like, we've definitely seen the red one do work being able to target stuff even in just the mice deck. So you get the targeted trigger for their Valiant or whatever. So that one gets used. I've definitely probably played the black one the least. Now that I'm thinking about it, I definitely used the green one in a couple of decks and it was really good just putting counters on stuff. And I've used the white one to search in a list already as well. So yeah, I mean, they're all kind of okay. I don't think any of them are superstars. So I don't have an issue with that part of the statement. But to say like the black one's the only good one, I really don't think that's true. All right, the croc cobbler, okay, says nowhere near enough skunks. Yeah, I mean, I think this is the same thing we came back to with weasels, right? We weren't going to make them a core creature type in the set. We've just introduced them to the game, and that's fine. Like, on some level, you kind of say, all right, let's see how people feel about them. Should we include them in a set we're working on, whatever the case may be? There will likely be more of both down the road. I think this is just a case of like, yeah, it's cool. It would have been nice if more of the ones that got introduced had a little more, but then that takes away from people trying to build actual theme decks with the creatures in the set. So I'm okay with it. I would rather at least be introduced and it gets people excited about them for down the road, because some of that is like, I wouldn't call it FOMO, but some anticipation, right? Now that they exist, you're going to be really excited when we make a set where there's like, I don't know, 5 weasels or 5 skunks or whatever, and you can actually build a deck with them. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Would be nice if you're a fan of those creature types for sure. But yeah, I think it's fine. And here we have Trappy Chan says, hot take is that the set has been surprisingly good for standard. People were discounting it as weak, but almost every tier 1 and tier 2 deck is running Bloomburrow cards. Not to mention entire archetypes that are surviving entirely because of or are brand new due to Bloomburrow cards. Yeah, this was, I mean, I don't know if this is a hot take, but it's definitely accurate. I think we are seeing a lot of Bloomburrow cards, some just filling in slots to replace other things, but in a lot of cases helping create brand new decks, or at least elevate underplayed deck types up, right? Like we've seen with the discard decks, right? That's a good example. The mono red decks getting some reasonable replacement. Mono green actually being really competitive with stuff like Scrap Shooter and the 3/3 guy that removes stuff from graveyards, right? So there's a lot of different stuff there to be played that I think people weren't paying attention to. Also, I just realized, like, if y'all haven't seen it, I have merch. I'm your Huckleberry. You should go pick this up. There's links down below. But I would say this, though, as in general, is this set was likely to have some impact on standard because we were just at a rotation point, right? We lost 4 sets. We were going to need to replace some stuff. So, yeah, this was likely going to get played. I think, however, they designed this set very well that not only do the cards do their jobs, they're enticing for people to play, right? People want to build a mouse theme deck. People want to build the raccoon theme deck, right? That makes a big difference. So you get to see even more of those cards in action. Whereas a lot of times, I think if we had not had a heavy creature theme throughout the set, there'd be kind of just a mismatch of cards, and people would probably be chasing down a lot of the same stuff. This kind of spreads it out and almost, I won't say forces, but entices people to play things a little bit different. And that's actually really good. So yeah, this set definitely has had an impact on Standard, and there will be a lot of Standard staples in the set moving forward. Well, yeah, there you go. There's all the hot takes. I don't know how many that was, but it was quite a few. And you can always follow me on socials if you want to participate in these in the future. I do a couple of these throughout the season now. And honestly, don't forget, click the links below and check out some merch from your boy. It helps support the channel and you can get some really fun stuff. That being said, check out the next video. You're probably going to have fun with that if you like this one. Talk to you later. It's all of you for now. See you next time.